If one picture is worth 1,000 words, you have seen about 1,000,000 words.
We found that there's a lot of truth to that idea that if you stand too close to something, you can't really see it. That's pretty much been our relationship with current events in the present. It's highlighted with the idea of retrospect.
When we're living through history, it's difficult to understand what exactly is taking place.
I guess the passage of time later gives us some perspective of, a clear understanding of what happened, how it happened, why it happened,
and what the impact was.
What were the influences and consequences? These things unfold when we look at the event in retrospect.
Welcome to Retrospeak.
Good old days. It's kind of like what that reformed version of the New York Doll said around 2005. And one day, it will please us to remember even this. And with that, I want to say hi to Patrick Ivanitski, my co-host, my partner in crime.
Hey,
we're back.
We are.
We'd like to welcome everybody to the Retrospeak podcast. We're taking on some of our Rock Under Fire crowd with us, hopefully. I think some people followed us.
Yeah, it looks like
from one place to another.
We're going to take a different approach with this one, right?
A much different approach. Yeah, we boxed ourselves into a corner with Rock Under Fire.
Good point.
And it was all about music and, our whole mission statement thing. We were just very limited in our subject matter. And sometimes you just want to talk about other things.
Which we often did. We ended up doing that anyway.
Yeah. The subject of, just with the Cincinnati Reds alone, I mean... Coming from a bunch of guys from New Jersey, out of
some of our guests,
the entire sports, just sports in general, sports alone, somehow the Reds came up in our podcast out of 46 episodes 5 times, 5 different times without even trying. And I don't know how that happened, but it just did.
Well, you know something, I want to cut you off for a second. My favorite things, some of my favorite things from Rock Under Fire were when we had some people on and were reminiscing. And I'm sure that sparked that... the idea sparked from that in your head. I I'm not I can't read your mind. I'm not a mind reader, but those were some of the best episodes that we recorded. I think when we had either people live with us talking or some people on the phone, and we were just reminiscing about the old days and
right
things that we were doing in the 90s and the 80s.
And I think one of our guests was actually from Cincinnati, or actually she was from Jersey, but she lives out in Cincinnati.
But she lives out there.
Yeah. This is basically nostalgia, man. People love nostalgia. What is it about looking back at the past that everybody... I mean, obviously, there are people that don't like to look back. Obviously, maybe like painful reasons or whatever.
Yeah.
They don't want to associate like a certain time of their lives or something, associate songs or music or something with something bad that happened in their lives. But I think for the most part, people love nostalgia. And the idea of... Let's take a couple of ideas. They almost sound like cliches, but the whole idea of learning from history, the quote that, those who don't remember history, people who forget history are doomed to repeat it, or that whole idea where if you're standing too close to something, you can't really see it. Like if you hold this, like this notebook, if I hold it right up to my face, I can't really see it. You got to pull it away in order to see it. When you're living through something, it's kind of hard to grasp what's
really
going on. You need the passage of time to understand what happened, how it happened, why it happened, what the influences were, what kind of consequences they may have brought.
Well, I think that you can. I think you can still reflect, and even there's a lot of negative things that happened in my life as well as everybody's. You just kind of look past those and try and not bury them, but move them aside. Because there are a lot of things that I enjoy looking back on, and it puts a smile on my face, and I think that goes for everybody that's going to listen to this podcast.
Today, our first topic is the 1978 New York Yankees, and the 1986 New York Mets. Those of us in New Jersey who grew up here in Central Jersey, we didn't have baseball teams and we didn't have football teams. So I guess it's safe to say that the majority of New Jersey baseball fans like New York teams.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say all of them, obviously, not all of them.
See, the thing with the
but
Yankees
a lot of us liked New York teams.
The thing with the Yankees is that they're a nationwide team. They've been successful for so long, and how many people have transplanted out of the tri-state area to other states that are still diehard Yankee fans? The Dodgers being, when the Dodgers moved out of Brooklyn and went to L.A., they lost a lot of fans. When the Giants left and went to the West Coast, they lost a lot of fans. Whereas the Yankees, they just stayed in that, and for the most part are playing in the same area. It's been revamped. Now it's a new stadium, but up until a few years ago, they were playing in the same stadium. They have the same exact uniforms, the interlocking NY and the pinstripes. Whereas the Mets, and then the flip side of that is the Mets. They were always the underdog. If you look at their uniforms, they were compiled of all four New York baseball teams. That orange is from the Giants, that blue is from the Dodgers, the pinstripes from the Yankees. So, and then the Mets, of course. So you have the underdog and then the behemoth, and there's Yankees fans all over the country. People go to a Kansas City Royals game in Kansas City to see the Yankees. It happens. It happens everywhere that they play. Maybe for the Mets as well because of the population in this area.
And I just want to acknowledge for those who are older than us, it's like I said at the beginning, who's to define what the good old days were? Because our good old days, like our golden age was Reggie Jackson, Ron Guidry, that team.
Greg Nettles.
And you mentioned Brooklyn Dodgers. There are people that I know that are much older than us that are just like, the Brooklyn Dodgers, that was the time. Those were the days.
Well,
and that kind of...
They say that too.
So,
They say it about the Yankees too, because the golden age of the Yankees by a landslide wasn't the 70s. I mean, you could arguably say it was the 90s. You could arguably say it was the 90s because they had such a really hell of a run.
Somebody might tell us the 50s.
Sure. I would have loved to have been around to see Mickey Mantle swing a baseball bat and see what he could do. And to the flip side of that, I'm a baseball fan, so the flip side of that would be Ted Williams from Boston. I'd love to have seen some DiMaggio, some of those guys.
The dynasties, even the 90s, the Yankees that went from the 90s, that run from 96 to about 2001, give or take 97. Even those teams,
the 98
there were much bigger dynasties in the Yankees' history. Like where they won 5 years in a row instead of 3.
That's tough because they just gelled. The 98 team is arguably probably the best team in history of the franchise.
Yeah, well, record-wise, definitely.
Yeah.
Record-wise, definitely.
Well, it was a group of guys that just really gelled and really played well together and really just came along. And were they better than that? Excuse me. Were they better than that those teams that won 5 in a row? You know what I mean? That's Casey Stengel is the manager. I mean, guys like Mickey Mantle and Lou Gehrig and Joe DiMaggio.
Yeah. I'm looking at this. The World Series they won 1949, 50, 51, 52, 53. So there's 1, 2. That's 5 years in a row. Yeah. And they also won. I mean, they won in 47. So they won 6 out of 7 years. That's crazy.
Here's something about those 90s teams. Now, I can't remember the 96 World Series if they won 3 straight to win that World Series or 2 straight to win that World Series. So it's either the number could be different.
Which year are you talking about?
96.
96.
Yeah, they won the World Series with Charlie Hayes making last out. I remember where I was when they won that World Series. But the next 2 times they were in the World Series was 98 and 99. And they swept both teams, Braves and Padres, respectively.
Right.
So there's 8 straight World Series wins. And then if you count the 96 club, it was either 2 or 3. So you're looking at 10 or 11, possibly 12 straight World Series
I think they
wins.
came from behind in 96.
They did. They definitely did. They were getting clobbered. The Braves were hammering them. And then all of a sudden they just caught some. Jimmy Leyritz, I think,
is that 11? Is that 11 wins?
It was like an 11 straight World Series wins. Yeah.
Wow.
That's a feat.
And if you count the consecutive nature of if this adds on to it, because I don't know. I know they beat the Mets in 2005 games, but I'm not sure what game the Mets
Well, then that
won.
could have been because if I'm not mistaken, their record was 12,
yeah.
so they could have won.
So Mets
won.
They probably won game 2 then.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. That was an interesting game, that 2001 World Series with Roger Clemens and Mike Piazza and the whole.
Yeah,
that's a story for another.
Is that when the broken bat and Clemens whipped it at him? I remember
Piazza
that.
was like, "What are you doing, man?" Yeah, and you had 9/11. It was a big that was a big time in the city.
Well, 9/11 happened, and there was Jeter hit the 2 home runs 2 nights in a row. This is strange because we get into I think in the second half of our show when we get into the Mets, there are moments in baseball where even though the Yankees lost that World Series in 2001, the high that we were on from those 2 home runs and those 2 comebacks and those 2 wins that the Yankees that they won, and it was I believe they were both in extra innings. Yeah, very late in the game. It was almost like we did win.
It was.
We won that World Series even though we lost. That's the way I've always looked at 2001 in my own mind. The highs of those 2 games were much
Joe Torre
bigger than the high of any Diamondbacks win.
He didn't. Joe Torre didn't make a lot of bad decisions, but I think in that World Series he did a couple. He did make a couple, and having them play at like double play depth, behind Mariano, and there were a few things that he should have done. Little bloop single that got over Mariano Duncan, I think, might have been playing second base, his head or Jeter's head, one of them. Yeah, it was just an interesting World Series. I lost. But I mean,
do you get what I
do.
mean?
I
It's like there are those moments, those little moments, hinting at the second half of our show when we get into the Mets. We're going to talk about Game 6 of '86, but even that, I mean, Game 6. If you think about Game 6 of '75, Carlton Fisk's home run. A lot of people forget that the Red Sox lost that World Series, but you would think that they won it. Yeah. The high that they were on from that game, that home run became bigger than the entire 75 World Series itself.
Some people might forget that, was it 76, right? The Yankees got smoked by the Reds.
Yeah.
I think they got swept, right?
That was their first World Series in the Steinbrenner era. Yeah. Steinbrenner comes on board. I'm not sure. What was this? 1973, I believe.
In that area.
And he
I don't know the exact year.
Redoes the stadium. There was a major facelift to Yankee Stadium, and I believe that it may have been controversial at the time. I was only 4 years old when they started that whole renovation. Another interesting fact is that in 1975, every New York team was playing in Shea Stadium.
Yeah.
You had the Mets and Yankees playing in Shea Stadium because Yankee Stadium was being done. You had the Giants and the Jets playing in Shea Stadium because Giant Stadium was being built. Yeah. And the Jets were still playing in Queens.
That's Steinbrenner. The start of that era, he did some things, man. Reggie Jackson being one of them. Bringing in the slugger that he did.
Yeah. Hence all the controversy and much of the hate that's directed at the Yankees, because the Yankees, let's face it, are probably also the most hated team in baseball around the country too.
Yeah, you either love them or hate them.
It's like it's like every time when we did our other podcast, that other show, the Beatles somehow always ended up in the discussion because, let's face it, love them or hate them, the Beatles are the exception to everything.
So you're going to say Reggie
and
Jackson
the Yankees
are
the Yankees are the Beatles of sports.
Okay, the Yankees are the Beatles of sports.
You either love the Beatles or you hate the Beatles.
So all those Stones fans out there then are Red Sox fans? God, I hope not. No. What's funny though about the Red Sox is that, and I'm going to tie it into music a little bit with Bruce. Because it's a working man's town, Boston. You know what I mean? And he does so.
They
well
love Bruce there. They love Bruce over there.
Love him. And they for what it's worth, most diehard Red Sox fans respect the Yankees, and I respect the Red Sox. Yeah, I don't like them, and I want to beat them every chance I get, or every chance that they play. But they respected Jeter, when he played there his last game. Guys like that, you tip your hat to that.
Exactly. The way the send off that they gave Jeter in Boston. It was just very cool what they did that day up at Fenway.
Well, enough of that. Let's get right into it, man. Let's get.
Speaking of Fenway,
yeah.
Well, I mean,
Bucky effing Dent.
Well, yeah, you got to go through '77, I guess, because you mentioned they got swept by the Reds in '76. It was their first time back in the series, and the Yankees pretty much did they? I guess they sucked through the rest of the '60s and into the '70s, and then the Steinbrenner era.
They lost a lot of heavyweights. You know what I mean? The dynasty. You can only be so good so long. Even the '90s team, you can only be so good so long. These guys get old,
right?
The farm system is depleted. the Bronx. Who the hell wanted to go to the Bronx in the 70s? Do you remember what the Bronx looked like in the goddamn 70s?
It was burning.
The movie Fort Apache, The Bronx, literally paints a picture of what the Bronx looked like in the 70s, and it was horrible. Nobody wanted to go to the Bronx to see a baseball game. So, yeah, in comes Steinbrenner off of to buy a dynasty, got it on the cheap, built it into $1 billion franchise.
Yeah. That's one of the major criticisms of the Yankees. You go out and buy all the best players, but you know what? Steinbrenner made it clear. He said to Billy Martin, he's like, you have one responsibility, or you have two responsibilities. He said you have two responsibilities. One, you have to win the World Series. Bring the World Series to New York, okay? Win the World Series. And if you get kicked out of the game, always put on a good show for the fans, and I'll pay your fines. So you have that 77 team, which was the first team that won the World Series in well over a decade. I don't know if it was the longest stretch that the Yankees went without a World Series win. I would imagine it was. I'm looking at the 23, 27, 28, 32, 36, 37, 38, 39, 41, 43, 47, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 56, 58, 61, 62, 77. So the biggest gap of the Yankees not winning the World Series was between 62 and 77. That was an eternity. If you were a lifelong Yankee fan and you were old enough, or you were old or young enough to have witnessed the Yankees in both those generations, where you were watching Roger Maris and you were also watching Reggie Jackson.
Yeah, there's some people out there that were lucky enough to see the trio, the Maris, the Jackson, and then even Jeter. The beginnings of Jeter, or Mattingly even.
Yeah,
that was a horrible stretch though too through the 80s. The 80s teams stunk, and that was a shame because a guy like Don Mattingly made it to one playoff in his entire career, stayed there his entire time, and only made it to one playoff series and lost.
Actually, you're right. That became the longest stretch without
it ended up
winning
being
a World Series.
Yeah.
But yeah, this was the first time in their history where it was.
And that's when Steinbrenner got out of hand with buying people. He just kept buying contract after contract after contract.
Yeah, Steinbrenner was out of control in the 80s. Into the 90s.
Yeah. I mean, when they lost, was it 80 or 81 when they lost to the Dodgers?
Yeah, that was that split season where they had the strike.
Yeah, the strike season, right. Bobby Mercer
and the Dodgers, they beat their ass that last game, 9-2, I think, the last game of the World Series in 81. Yankees didn't have a chance. They lost that game early. I was 11 years old watching that game.
Yep.
And it was just, I don't even think I watched the whole game.
Lost my first bet in that game to my grandmother. $5 bet. She made me pay up, too. I was the same age, 11 years old. My grandfather was a big Dodgers fan. She goes, I'm going to pick the Dodgers because of your grandfather. He had already passed. And I took my beloved Yankees and lost $5.
Well, that team, coming into the 78 season, it was kind of the 77, the controversy of 77, and just that tumultuous summer as it was, even just given everything else outside of baseball going on in New York City, the son of Sam.
Yeah.
You had the blackout.
Yeah.
There was just there's no, it's very well documented. Yeah. Watch the Spike Lee movie. It's really good.
Movie.
It's very.
It is really good.
Or any documentary on the summer of 77. The coldest year in hell.
Yeah, you and I do agree on a lot of different things, and that movie right there, it really painted a picture of what New York City was like in that during that time.
There's a really good book called "The Bronx is Burning" also. And obviously the relationship between Jackson and Martin, they hated each other.
And they really did.
There was a respect. I mean, it was kind of like a love-hate thing. They respected each other, I think, quietly, but it was just,
maybe.
I don't know.
Maybe. I mean, they. Billy always pressed Reggie to do something that Reggie didn't want to do.
I think in the end, with those 3 home runs, he kind of gained Martin. He just kind of stepped back. There was that one time in 78 where I think he told him to bunt.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And he gave them the signal to bunt.
Right.
And it was a strike. The first pitch was a strike. Then the signal goes out for him to swing away, and he tried bunting again. And the third base coach, I think, was Hauser. He comes down the line to talk to Reggie. Maybe he got the signals crossed. And then he goes to bunt again and gets out, and then Reggie and him go into it. They get into it in the dugout. He suspended him for 5 games and then resigned from
That's
that.
right.
Billy
That's right.
resigned
That
out of
whole summer, it was we're into July. We're getting near the All-Star break when all this stuff is going down, and then you start getting word that Billy Martin's going to be fired. And weeks are going by, and nothing's happening, and he beats him to the punch. He resigns, and there's all these rumors that he's sick, and he's got this very gray complexion, and he's lashing out all these inappropriate ways on the field, in the dugout, on his teammates, in the press. He's saying all these crazy things, and he resigns. Then eventually he does admit that they found a spot on his liver, and there's all kind of things happening with him medically. And then the punchline is a couple days later. I don't know if it was less than a week later on Old Timers Day.
Yeah.
In the Bronx. They introduced Billy Martin, number 1, Billy Martin, and the manager of the New York Yankees for the 1980 season, Billy Martin. And everybody's like, huh?
Yeah.
What?
He'd be back.
Billy Martin, I guess he was going to honor, I don't know, I guess he had to honor Bob Lemon's contract or something, give him another year or whatever it was. Bob Lemon, the total opposite in personality of from Billy Martin, just quiet, just very humble, quiet guy from the White Sox, and he comes
Kind of
over,
just lets them do their thing, I think.
And at that point, they were 14 games back. Bob Lemon comes in. I think, granted, they had already started their winning streak in the last week of Billy Martin's stay with the Yankees before he resigned. And it was just it was just so far off. It was just no chance that the Yankees were going to postseason in mid-July, the end of July. There were 14 games back.
Yeah, they wrote them off early. I want to go back to a Reggie thing real quick too, because this you got to take. Okay, we spoke about Billy being in the presence of Billy, but Reggie, for that guy to say some of the things that he said, the straw that stirs the drink and stuff like that, he almost didn't have any respect for the players around him. Thurman Munson was the captain of that team. He was the leader of those Yankee teams. And for Reggie to come in here and say something like that, it's almost like he wanted to be the villain. It was strange. Maybe it powered him. Maybe it juiced him to be loved and hated at the same time. Is that possible?
Yeah, I think he was already somewhat a veteran. He was coming from 3 World Series teams. I don't know. Did he win all three of those A's wins in the early 70s? Was he?
He had to have been.
Was he on all 3 of them? I know he was injured in one of them. I don't even think he played in one of those series.
I would have to research that. I would have to look back at that about the A's teams.
I think he may have even been on crutches during one of those series. I'm not sure. I mean, just looking back or reading back, like historically, I mean, we were 2 or 3 years old during those years. But
his first year was 69.
I think he just came to the Yankees and he knew like a lot of them were young. He just came with a sense of experience and a sense of
why George went
of a
after him.
track record and mileage. And I can have this attitude because I'm Reggie Jackson. Like he was already Reggie Jackson by the time he came to the Yankees. So it just everything on the Yankees was just icing on the cake, man.
He brought that same mentality to the Angels when he went to the Angels. He was still he's humbled a lot when you see him speak now, and I'm glad to see that because he was an exciting player to watch.
Yeah,
not my favorite Yankee by a long shot. But to see him humbled now by and helping out younger kids in the organization, I'm happy to see that.
Yeah. So they come back. They go on a winning streak. Boston starts to collapse all through August, and then something happens. Boston, they kind of get it together near the end. End up on the last game of the season. The Yankees lose. They lose to the Red Sox. They lose to the Indians. The Red Sox win. They end up tied. I mean, the chances of that happening when you're looking at the standings at the end of July.
Yeah, it was.
At the time, and there's got to be bigger comebacks. I'm sure that at this point there were bigger comebacks. At the time, they're saying, this is the greatest comeback in baseball history.
Sitting here today,
in the context of 1978, that was probably true at the time.
Sitting here today, the Yankees are currently 10 and a half or 10 games out of first place, and they have 7 games left with the Red Sox.
And 40 years later, I mean, we find ourselves in almost the same situation.
Right. 2 really
very
good
much
teams.
the same situation.
I didn't think the Red Sox were going to be as good as they are. They're a very, very good team right now.
So conceivably, if we get Reggie Jackson back, get out, Sweet Lou, find Greg Nettles, find Willie Randolph, get those guys out there.
Bucky Dent, Chris Chambliss, Ron Guidry. You're not going anywhere without Ron Guidry. Do you know what he did in that playoff game, that single playoff
24-3 in the regular season.
Yes,
the regular season.
25-3 because he won that game up in Boston.
So he won the game, yeah.
Do you know what he was doing pregame? Taking
Absolutely.
a nap. He was sleeping underneath the stadium before the game started.
Mm-hmm.
That is a different era. Those guys like to drink it up a lot in the 70s and 60s and 50s. So I don't know whether he's drinking. I don't know what it was, but he was sleeping and comes out and pitches like he does. It's the guy. He pitched a gem. Yeah. He really did.
So the last game of the season was on the Sunday, the last weekend of the baseball season, and after the game, they find out, obviously, they got to go to Boston and play this game. And Ron Guidry walks into Bob Lemon's office knowing he just pitched on Friday. So there was no way he was next in the rotation.
No, absolutely not.
He says to Bob Lemon, I want the ball tomorrow. Without even missing a beat, he said, you got it.
That's ballsy.
You got it.
It's another thing that the era, those guys were pitching 9 innings, 8 innings. Mm-hmm. There were some pitchers who pitched, and later on we're going to talk about the Mets a little bit, but if I'm not mistaken, there was a Mets playoff game with the Astros where Nolan Ryan and Doc Gooden pitched 10 innings apiece, or 11 innings.
I want to get into that a little bit further on,
game.
Too.
But you don't get that anymore. A guy goes 6 innings, they're like, okay, good, give me the ball back. You pat him on the ass.
That is my major gripe with baseball today. Let's get back to that a little bit later.
Yeah, we will.
That's going to be like...
It just tied in beautifully right there with what you were saying.
So that is my biggest issue with the major leagues today. Or like in the last 10, 15 years.
It's an investment that the teams are making an investment.
The whole idea of the closer, and tell that to the bullpen in 1978.
A closer is a closer. Okay, 9th inning, 8th inning, but your starter.
The majority of the saves was Gossage. Not
right.
all of them.
No,
Ken Clay had a chance at a save once in a while.
Your starters got you there though. If there was no middle reliever, I mean there were, but. If the guy was getting shelled, he was going to get pulled in the middle. A guy who's going to go in there for mop-up duty. But now you have a guy who's he's strictly a middle reliever now, which is ridiculous.
It is. I
get
into that a little.
Yeah, we can absolutely
further along the way, man. So Boston, Fenway Park. Did you watch it? Do you remember watching? I remember watching it. I was at my grandmother's house watching this.
It's Phil Rizzuto and Frank White, was it? Was it Frank White?
It was a Monday afternoon, mid-afternoon. One thing I remember the most, and aside from the obvious, was the sun. The sun glare. When I think of Fenway Park, I always think of the sun, and I always think of that game. And if you watch
the creepy shadows,
you've seen a lot of games in Boston from Fenway Park on television, but for some reason, the sun, the glow, the glare on the field is just like this weird, eerie, ominous glaze on that field.
I gotta stop.
And I don't know if it's the way the video is aged.
It has.
Or something.
I'm going to stop you right there because Fenway looks nothing like that. Fenway hasn't changed. Fenway's like one of the only ballparks that really hasn't changed. It's exactly the same little sandbox.
With the exception of the seats above the wall.
Right. With that, that's being the exception. And now they have snipers up on the roofs. My brother was just there. They do. He took a picture of them. That being said, that video has not aged well. I do agree with you because visually, I remember seeing it that way.
Yeah.
And Fenway always looked like this, like a shit box to me.
Yeah.
Whereas, Yankee Stadium was this glorious, like that's what a baseball stadium should look like. And so I just think the video didn't hold up because now if you look at it at Fenway on a newer television and you see video from it, it looks better. And that old video still doesn't look good on my $3,000 television. But I agree with you with the light and the haunting. It always had like a haunting look to it, and maybe I don't know. Maybe as being a Yankee fan, that's what it was. It just looked like that to us. It was like the Addams family lived there, and we were like the rich people up on the hill.
So there, Guidry's facing Mike Torres, who had won the World Series with the Yankees, the previous year, and then he went out and he kind of badmouthed a lot of the team, and a lot of them were hurt by that. Nettles in particular. Nettles wanted to beat his ass.
Yeah.
And it was they're up ahead 2-0. He's pitching maybe a 2-hitter into the 7th inning. I don't know, it was a 2 or 3-hitter, but it was a nice, comfortable lead. I mean, comfortable for 2-0. It was pretty comfortable because the Yankees were not hitting Torres.
No, they definitely were not. Well, the Yankees, to put it in perspective, the Yankees only had 8 hits on the entire day.
Yeah,
I have the stats right up. So you could be right that Torres could have been pitching a 2-hitter.
Yeah.
Because if you go, they didn't score until the 7th inning, the Yankees. They were down 2-0 up until the 7th inning.
Right. And then the dreaded words, Bucky Dent.
Deep to left. Yastrzemski will not get it. It's a home run. A 3-run home run for Bucky Dent. The Yankees now lead it by a score of 3-2. Bucky Dent has just hit his 5th home run of the year into the screen. And look at that Yankee bench, led by Bob Lemon. Big Cliff Johnson out there. And a happy Bucky Dent. Yankees now lead 3-2. Well, the last guy on the ball club you'd expect to hit a home run just went into the screen. Bucky Dent.
Yeah, you got to remember too. Bucky had the historic home run in that game. Reggie had a pretty big home run in that game.
See, Reggie had to come in. There's the ego, man. He had to come in and hit his. It's like he always. That's the thing about Reggie. He always hit the home runs at the key moments, the key games.
And they
always,
needed it, man. They needed it. It's funny.
77, the last game of the World Series, where what became it was Game 6, 3 home runs. Opening day, his first swing, home run over the fence.
3 different pitchers in that World Series too.
We can't mention the 78 Yankees, but you can't. It wasn't all just about Ron Guidry. Ed Figueroa, I believe, was the first Puerto Rican pitcher to win 20 games. I mean, he was 20-9. You had a rookie in Jim Beattie who was kind of he struggled a little bit during the first half of the year. They actually sent him back to the minors for a while, but then he came back up. And I think he had he pitched a really good game in the World Series. My first Yankee game was a year later, and I saw Jim Beattie pitch.
I saw
the Yankees against
the
White Sox, and they lost. The White Sox beat him 7-0, and I remember it was jacket night. It was jacket night. It was one of those really cheap vinyl jackets, and I remember putting my arm in it, and it went right through it, and it ripped, and I started to cry.
And
because I was a little kid. What do you
got drenched in those, because you sweat, and if it was raining, you sweat more. Those things.
One of the weird things that I remember, and this has got nothing to do with our topic, but I just remember going to that game, and we were in the bleachers, and we were watching batting practice, and just one of the weirdest things I ever saw as a kid watching live baseball, Jim Spencer, who was the backup first baseman, when Chambliss wasn't playing, seeing Jim Spencer on the mound pitching during batting practice. I was just we were just kind of laughing, saying, "Wow, Jim Spencer's pitching. Wow, weird." But anyway, is it one of those moments that I guess it always goes back to 78? When you think 78, it goes back to the home run. Was it bigger than the World Series? Was that one Boston game bigger than? Because you often forget, tell me about that World Series. What happened in that World Series? There were key moments in that World Series that we remember. I remember Reggie Jackson running to second base, and then they got him in that, he kind of got pegged with the ball, and then Lasorda came out and started arguing that Jackson deliberately got in the way. I remember that. Yeah,
Reggie getting hit, and then Reggie knew that when you look at that tape now,
yeah,
Reggie knew he should have been. Lasorda was kind of right on that.
Nettles, obviously, with those massive catches.
Yeah,
just the best third baseman I've ever seen in my lifetime, man.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Defensively, yeah.
He was a hell of a defender. He really was.
He hit home runs.
Just seeing that guy, parallel to the field, making these catches that he made, that was my little league number 9. Love that guy so much.
We have to mention, Willie Randolph being hurt in the postseason. So, Brian Doyle, he had his 15 minutes of fame, so to speak.
Yeah.
He helped them win that World Series.
He hit 192 for the season.
They had a lot of with second base. I mean, I don't remember. I obviously a lot of this we're looking at historically because again in 1978 we were both 8 years old, and I remember fragments of that season. I do remember Randolph being injured. I do remember Brian Doyle, but apparently, I mean, they had like four people playing second base that year. It was a guy named George Zaber, and there was a guy named Damaso Garcia, who, I don't know, maybe he played. I don't know. I mean, I'd be lucky if I was able to say that he played maybe 10 games that year.
Right.
But for the most part, it was Randolph, and Doyle was the key, one of the key infielders of that 78 World Series. That team, man. That team. The outfield, Lou Piniella, Mickey Rivers. You had speed in Mickey Rivers. You had power in Jackson and Nettles at third base. Home runs. Piniella could hit home runs when he wanted to. You had the sage, the old man on the mountain figure in Roy White, who was like this meditative, just he kept the team when they were fighting, he was always the guy that was just kind of like, come on guys, let's pull this together.
I met him. Very classy guy. Very, very classy guy. I met him at the stadium.
Nice.
One of the greatest guys I've ever met. Loved meeting him. Very approachable too.
Munson, obviously Thurman Munson, arguably the greatest Yankee of my lifetime. Obviously really? Next to Jeter.
I would say Jeter. I'm going to go Jeter.
Jeter or Thurman Munson. We met. A few of my friends. We met Bucky Dent and Lou Piniella at Woodbridge Center Mall.
He owned that restaurant.
He had Sweet Lou's Pub.
Yeah.
But that was the following year. That was when after Bucky Dent became this big sex symbol, and he was on posters, with the half shirt, and, posing with the baseball bat.
Yeah.
My friend Eric, who was on our Rock Under Fire podcast, and I don't know what it was in him, or if it was a joke or some sick joke or what it was, but as a birthday present, man, he gave me that poster.
That's funny.
I was like, yeah, I like Bucky Dent, but not like this, man. This is like a poster that a girl hangs up in her room. And hey, I hung it up in my room. I had that poster hanging up in my room next to Kiss. But yeah, speaking of comebacks, I guess we'll leave it. We'll have our little intermission here, and we'll come back with another major comeback in New York sports history in the 1986 New York Mets. All right, this thing I'm about to read is not about the 1972 Exile on Main Street tour of the Rolling Stones. This is not about Motley Crue on tour in 1987. This is not some debaucherous rock and roll lifestyle. This is the 1986 New York Mets. They trashed airplanes. This is from Jeff Pearlman's book, The Bad Guys Won. They trashed airplanes and buses. They spent nights in jail cells and woke up on the front pages of tabloids. They taunted opponents with guarantees of victories and backed it all up with the best baseball in the major leagues. The team was, I think it's the closest in terms of, again, the debauchery of a rock and roll lifestyle. You had guys doing, you had
they were doing coke in the locker room. They were bad.
Yeah.
The 86
the alcohol,
Mets,
the trashing of hotel rooms and airplanes and the fights. Primarily, we're going to talk about Game 6, but that team, they won 108 games. They were 108-54.
Weren't they like 21 and a half games up?
They were 21 and a half games up in July, and they finished 21 and a half games up. It was almost guaranteed that they were going into the postseason. And the Phillies
won 86
in July.
Games.
Yeah,
86 games.
Yeah,
that's unheard of.
Back when there was a pennant race.
But you know something? The fighting and everything like that. There was a glue to all of them. My aunt is a big Mets fan, so I could talk a little bit about them. I don't like them that much. I did watch the World Series, obviously. Mets, Red Sox. You're like, okay, who the hell do I root for in this one? But there was still a bond between them. It was them against you. Mm-hmm. So there might have been some in-house fighting, but it's like it's like your brother. I could fight my brother, but when you come in and fight my brother, I'm going to kick your ass. That doesn't happen, and that's exactly what that team was like.
Yeah,
the guy, the likes of like a Gary Carter. I mean, this guy is That's a hard-nosed catcher that you want on your ball club.
For all of the talk that the Mets fans do about the Yankees going out and getting the best players here, to hit home runs, and that was the one time that the Mets. It just seems that the one time that the Mets did that, they just happened to win the World Series, and it was a miracle. Like it was, how bad does a team have to be to be called a miracle if you win?
Coincidentally, they did the same thing happened to them when they went out and got Mike Piazza. Got to spend a little money out there, folks.
I have to say, and I'm going to drop a bomb on all my New York Yankee friends who are fans of the Yankees. Those of you who know me know that as you know, I'm pretty much a Yankee fan, but I do not hate the Mets. I've always rooted for the Mets. I've almost been like equal parts Yankee and Met fan. Yeah, I know that's a shock. It's very rare if you're a sports fan. I've always been first and foremost. And I just want to, I can't be any more clear. I've always been first and foremost a New York fan. And I will root for any New York team that is in the postseason. I don't look at, as a Yankee fan, I don't think you should hate the Mets. You should, you hate the Red Sox. If you're a Mets fan, you hate the Braves or the Phillies, or you get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah,
it's kind of like the Mets have always been, to me, has always been kind of like the Yankees' little brother type of thing, just the annoying cousin or something like that. But it's New York.
I could watch them, if they were in the World Series, but I'm
not a Giants fan. But anytime that the Giants were in the Super Bowl, I've always rooted for the Giants. I grew up, my dad is a hardcore Jets fan, so I grew up with the Jets.
Right.
But I've rooted for the Giants when they were in the Super Bowl. Every Super Bowl, it was personal, especially the ones against New England. I mean, you're ridiculous if you're a Jets fan and you root for the Patriots just because they're playing the Giants. I don't buy that. I don't buy that.
I'm a big diehard Jets fan. I would rather see the Patriots bus crash into the stadium parking lot.
And equally so, man. If you were a Yankee fan that rooted for the Red Sox in '86 just because they were playing the Mets, hey, you're ridiculous. Come on.
Never happened. That would never. I could never even imagine that.
I know Yankee fans that rooted for the Red Sox.
That's absolutely ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. So that's the way I see it. I was rooting hardcore for the Mets in '86, and I was practically crying in the bottom of the 10th inning when they pulled that champagne out of the Mets locker room, and they wheeled it all the way to the Red Sox locker room. All right? They showed it. They showed the champagne. They showed it on TV. It was almost like insult to injury.
There were players from the Mets who watched that game from the clubhouse.
A team that finished 21 and a half games up, and they're 108 games, and they were one strike away from losing that World Series
to a team that hadn't won a World Series since 1918.
That's right, and that's where that was. I guess the curse wasn't. I don't know. When did we start hearing about this big curse, the Babe Ruth curse?
It was always a curse of the Bambino, because you heard about it in the 70s and 80s as well. Because
I don't remember. Yeah,
the Red Sox,
I guess it was
they could never get out of their own way.
I don't remember. I don't remember hearing about it until the last
1918. You stretch it into the 90s and 2000s. That 1918, became a much longer stretch,
especially
like
with the Bucky
hockey.
Dent factor.
Yeah, and the New York Rangers, the 1940 thing until they won in 94.
There was a lot less history in 78 to 86. So yeah, that makes sense.
But once you got into the 90s, you're like, whoa, that gap has gotten pretty large. And they're a big city team. It's not like I don't know. Who's a small city club? Kansas City. They come to mind.
Yeah, but that team, the pitching staff, man. Like you said, we were saying earlier, Gooden, Ron Darling, Bobby Ojeda, Sid Fernandez,
not Figueroa,
Rick Aguilera, the bullpen, Roger McDowell, Jesse Orozco. Now, again, getting back to the closer thing, Roger McDowell finished with 22 saves that year. Jesse Orozco finished with 21 saves that year. You see what I'm saying? You see where I'm going with this? There wasn't all built around one pitcher, because we're gonna pull. My number one thing is. And we'll get back to the '86 Mets because this plays a large part in it, and the stats that I'm going to present testify to that. This whole idea of the pitch count, to me, I get it. You're paying money for these pitchers, and you want to protect them and all that. If the National League really wanted to protect their pitchers, they would get rid of they would get a DH rule in there, and they wouldn't make their pitchers hit. That's neither here nor there. That's another conversation. But the idea of pulling your pitcher, no matter how great he's doing,
because of a pitch count,
or because it's the 7th inning or whatever it is, more times than none, and this goes for every team, the bullpen comes in and blows the game.
You know what, though? A lot of the old-timers say that, and I'm not a fan of it either, but some of those old-timers say that the damage, David Cohn in particular, that the damage that was done to their arms pitching those amounts of innings, and you know, these guys are jacked up out there, and they're going to go.
Now everybody's pitching for speed. Everybody's throwing a lot harder.
Throwing a lot harder.
I don't
150
know,
pitches,
why,
I'll do it,
why they
Coach.
got to do that, but tell that to Steve Carlton. Tell that to Nolan Ryan. Tell that to Tom Seaver. You know, the disappearance of stats, entire stats that are gone, like complete games. Doc Gooden pitched 12 complete games that year. I don't think you get 12 complete games in the entire league during the entire season combined, man.
He threw 250 innings that year, too.
Yeah. The disappearance of the shutout as a stat.
Yeah.
Steve Carlton was like almost like the shutout king back then. I remember Fernando Valenzuela, his first season. He was a brand new pitcher. His first 5 games were shutouts.
Nolan Ryan was pretty good at those, too.
Yeah, I would say so.
Complete games. Gone.
So you see the disappearance of, pitchers back then. You know, if the pitcher was doing great, they were left in. They pitched the entire game. The bullpen, the relief pitchers were they were exactly that. They were relief pitchers. They came in if your starter was not doing good. They didn't come in because they were supposed to, or because it says that after so many pitches somebody's got to be brought in to blow the game. All right, rant over.
Let the starter blow the game.
Exactly.
So here's the 86 call. Quote, Vin Scully calling the game. So the winning run is at second base with 2 outs. 3-2 to Mookie Wilson.
Little roller down.
Roller up along
It
first.
gets by Buckner.
Behind the bag. It gets behind Buckner. Here comes Knight, and the Mets win.
Yeah.
Now, at that point, he just
shuts
down.
It was total silence.
He let it. He let the mayhem ensue. The Mets fans were going crazy.
I know you were going with this.
And then he comes. If one picture is worth 1,000 words, you have seen about a million words.
Pictures or words.
But more than that, you have seen an absolutely bizarre finish to the Game 6 of the 1986 World Series. The Mets are not only alive, they are well, and they will play the Red Sox in Game 7 tomorrow.
And everybody forgets about Game 7.
Yeah.
Does anybody remember Game 7?
Not a thing about it.
There you go, and it goes back to that thing.
You can probably quiz people, and they think the Mets won the World Series
in Game 6. Yeah, it's the same thing when I think about Carlton Fisk hitting that home run in '75. I didn't watch that live because I was not into baseball yet. My first baseball season that I really was aware and cared was '77. But everything goes back to that moment when Carlton Fisk hits that ball. It goes over out into left field, and he's out there, and he's kind of hopping along the first baseline, and he's kind of fanning it almost, like I said, I often say he's kind of like that, like Mickey Mouse in his Sorcerer's Apprentice, man. Like he's just he's like spitting out these incantations and putting a spell on the ball, and it's kind of mystically going over where directing it, and almost like Babe Ruth, man, pointing out, the whole the myth. I don't know how much truth there is to it, where he pointed where the ball was going to go in the 1932 World Series. It's just these little moments that are bigger than what they were part of, bigger than the whole, bigger than the totality of the World Series itself. And Game 7, look, there's so many directions to go here. Bill Buckner. Bill Buckner gets such a bad rap. The game was already tied, number 1.
Yeah.
So even if Buckner got that,
back.
the Red Sox had to go to bat and try to go ahead.
Yeah.
There's that, and there's also the fact that, there was Game 7. The Red Sox still had another chance to win that World Series, and they didn't. It's not Bill Buckner's fault. If anything, look, Wally Backman comes to the plate. He's out, okay? He doesn't get on base. Keith Hernandez comes to the plate. He's out.
Yeah.
Goes into the locker room. At this point, Keith Hernandez is in the locker room. He's done. He's
in plain
he's
clothes.
Done. And
the
he's
rumor has it
sitting
he's in plain
at
clothes.
Davy Johnson's desk, and he's got his feet on a desk, and he's smoking a cigarette. That's how done he was.
Yeah.
And we're sitting home. I'm sitting home, and I'm sitting there like, oh my God, like all of my Yankee, the Yankee fans, the friends that I had that were rooting for Boston. I was going to get so much crap on Monday morning when I went to school, and I did know a few Red Sox fans. How do I explain this? How do I deal with this? This sucks. This is like it can't get any worse than this. And Gary Carter comes to the plate, and he lashes a single out to left field, and it's just kind of like, so what? Big deal. Kevin Mitchell comes up. He does the same thing. Ray Knight comes up. He does the same thing. Carter comes home. Now it's 5-3.
Grinding it out.
Or 5-4 rather. It's a one-run game, and Mitchell's on third, and Mookie Wilson is down to his last strike, and he's foul tipping and fouling the ball off. I don't know, it was like 20 fouls in a row, and there's a wild pitch, and Mitchell comes home. That game was tied. At that point, I don't know what was in the stars, man, but they had the power of the Mystics on their side in the bottom of the 10th inning of that game. The incident with Buckner, Vince Scully, man. Little roller along first.
The thing about Scully is that he was always so reserved, too, yet he like popped at that moment,
2 out, 3-2 to Mookie Wilson. Little roller up along first, behind the bag. It gets through Buckner. Here comes Knight, and the Mets win it.
I wonder what Howard Cosell would have sounded like if he had called that game.
Yeah.
If he was up in the booth. But yeah, it was just, your question, I think we were talking privately, was it really a comeback?
Yeah, was it a comeback or a collapse? But, now the more I think about it,
just
they
weird,
came back
just
already.
the idea of, it was errors. I mean, both those runs were scored on errors. I mean, a wild pitch.
Yeah.
And obviously what happened with Bill Buckner. We forget about Game 7, but it was just such a big moment in New York sports history. I guess in our own lifetimes, I can't imagine, and maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I mean, if you, I don't know if you disagree with me or if you could think of any bigger comeback, and I maybe you can because you're really not a Mets fan.
A bigger comeback
Then what happened where a team that was just almost, and I don't want to say like
Yankees.
they had.
I'm going to say the Yankees in '96. The Braves were a dominant baseball team. The Braves
were they down to their last strike in the World Series?
No, they weren't, but they were getting demolished, man. If I'm not mistaken, they were down 3-1 and fought their way. And they lost big. They weren't just, they were lost like 6-2. I mean, they were getting banged around.
Yeah.
And for them all of a sudden to put it together and just win out to win the World Series. Okay, yeah, they weren't down to the last strike. I mean, that's just
That's
you
just some crazy.
Yeah,
that's just insane what happened there. You don't write that into a script.
Right. Red Sox fans are ready to jump off the roofs of buildings because they hadn't won anything since 1918, and the curse and this and that and the other thing. And the last strike. No, the Yankees certainly didn't face that. But the '96 Braves. Look, the Braves were like the bells of the ball all the time. They were always there. But they, but like their date took off with somebody hotter because they always ended up losing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at this. This is just off. Like Phil Niekro, 1978, he pitched 22 complete games. Have there even been 22 complete games in the 21st century?
I can't remember the last player to pitch over 15 complete games. That's
total complete games in the major leagues. That would be kind of like a homework assignment to look up the total complete games in the major leagues 2017, 2016, 2015. I will guarantee you any given year there were probably less than 10. Less than 10. That's kind of a... Are you doing it?
Yeah, I'm going to look it up.
While we're waiting for Pat to get that stat. I'm a poet and I don't know it. Waiting for Pat to get the stat.
Here's...
We just want to welcome everybody to the...
It's definitely more than 10.
Oh, it is more than 10. Like the total number of complete games in the major leagues in what year?
You said 17,
is it less
right?
than
I went to 2017.
Is it less than 20? Like we're one pitcher...
Let's see here. Yearly... Let's see. We'll do American League.
game leaders.
We'll do American League first. It's not a very good website that I'm looking at, so you guys are going to have to bear with me.
Like what pitcher led in complete games last year?
We're going to have to research that.
Yeah,
there's too much.
I bet you it's under 5.
Baseball is there was
a pitcher that pitched more than 5 complete games in the really
in that headline there was Johnny
Cueto
had 5.
5. All right, and that was like his big banner year, like in 2011.
It was 2016 that he did that.
Really?
Yeah. Jake Arrieta had 4 in 2015.
4. Wow.
There was a tie in 2017. Ivan Nova and Carlos Martinez had 2. It's something. Baseball is so stat-driven.
It's a stat that is just disappeared.
It's something that
and 2 is really nothing. It's really not. I mean, it's a lot now. But that's just the ridiculous nature of Major League Baseball right now. That's why we have this podcast, because we're a bunch of old farts sitting back saying, it was much better back then when pitchers completed games and the closer was more of just a relief pitcher, and relief pitcher meant relief pitcher.
1946, Bob Feller had 36 complete games.
See that? All right. Well, I rest my case. Anyway, the Retrospeak podcast, this is what we do. We're going to get into vintage, retro, sports, music, films, history, art, science, technology, you name it. If it's old, books, yeah. We're going to be looking at a lot of cool stuff, folks. So, get on board with us. We're on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher. Like us on Facebook. There's a lot of stuff going on our Facebook page. Tell us on Facebook. Give us your comments about this episode. What is your favorite comeback moment in baseball or sports for that matter? Just give us your thoughts about this episode. Give us your thoughts about these 2 teams that we talked about. We always look forward to your comments, even if you want to trash us. I guess with that,
the first one is in the books.
Patrick Ivanitski, Mike Derrico here, Retrospeak. We will see you next time.
If one picture is worth 1,000 words, you have seen about 1,000,000 words.